everyone, welcome to Julie Reads Her Bookshelf. I'm Julie. For those of you who are new to the channel, this is a channel where I read through all of the unread books on my bookshelf until we reach zero. And we are, of course, a long way from zero. Today I come to you with the mid-year Freakout tag. And being relatively new to BookTube, this is my first time doing the tag. And I think it's been around the blocks, this particular tag, because some of the questions hark back to the days when BookTube was very much about kind of YA or genre fiction. So we'll see how we go with the questions. I have them right here. The first question is kind of a hard one to kick off this tag, and that's the best book that you've read this year. For me, there are three books in contention. There's Middlemarch by George Eliot. There is Vanity Fair by Thackeray and House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. And all three books I just have absolutely loved. And it's difficult for me to pick one. I think for me, there is a distinction between the best out of those three and my favorite out of those three. And I think the best, if we were to be totally objective, would be George Eliot's Middlemarch. I just thought this book was absolutely phenomenal. It took me about 100 pages to get into it and to get used to George Eliot's writing. But once I was in it, I thought it was amazing, and I was completely caught up by the kind of interwoven lives of all of the characters in this community and this kind of tenderness and humanistic tone that George Eliot has, and the way she writes about them with absolutely phenomenal prose. And I cannot recommend this highly enough. And it's difficult to see another book topping Middlemarch this year. Although, as I said, it's not necessarily my favorite out of those three. I think my favorite out of those three is House of Mirth, which just got me. The book was brutally tragic, and I had such an emotional reaction to it. But as I said, favorite is not always the best. So I'm going to go with Middlemarch by George Eliot for the first question. The second question is best sequel you've read this year. Now this is a weird one because it assumes that everyone reads sequels. And my immediate reaction is that, well, I haven't actually read a book that is a sequel this year, but of course, that's kind of wrong because I did read and I really enjoyed Rumpel a la carte by John Mortimer. Now, for those who don't know, Rumpel is a series of books written by the British author John Mortimer about an old criminal barrister in the UK. He works at the Old Bailey, and it is a series of short stories about his various cases, appearing before the old darlings on the bench, dealing with kind of these hardened criminals that he has a great deal of affection for, and an absolute commitment to the presumption of innocence and all of those fundamental concepts of our legal system that that underpin kind of Western liberal traditions. And it is funny, it's heartwarming. I really read these stories as a bit of a comfort read. And Rumpel a la carte, of course, is not the first series of short stories in the series. I think the first one is Rumpel of the Old Bailey, although you can buy them all as omnibus editions now. So I do recommend these, and because it's the only sequel that I have read this year, I guess it is the best. The third question is new release that you haven't read yet but want to. And I don't actually pay that much attention to new releases because the point of this channel is actually to get through all of my unread bookshelf. And the more I sort of stray away from new releases, the quicker I can get through all of the unread books and be less distracted by shiny new things. But there is actually one book that's been sort of micro-targeting me for the last couple of weeks, and that's Wifedom by Anna Funder. For those who don't know, Anna Funder is an Australian author. I think she's best known for her phenomenally good non-fiction Stasi-land about the Stasi. Oh, okay. That's my cat. Say hi to the camera. So she's known for her book Stasiland, and it is. I thought that was quite a strong book by her. I don't actually have that particular book, but I have her novel which she released after Stasiland called, I think, All That I Am. And I really enjoyed both. I probably enjoyed Stasiland a bit more. I'll just read the synopsis for the book. Looking for wonder and some reprieve from the everyday, Anna Funder slips into the pages of her hero George Orwell. As she watches him create his writing self, she tries to remember her own. When she uncovers his forgotten wife, it's a revelation. Aileen O'Shaughnessy's literary brilliance shaped Orwell's work, and her practical now saved his life. But why and how was she written out of the story? Using newly discovered letters from Aileen to her best friend, Funder recreates the Orwell's marriage through the Spanish Civil War and World War II in London. As she rolls up the screen, concealing Orwell's private life, she's led to the question what it takes to be a writer and what it is to be a wife. Compelling and utterly original, Wifedom speaks to the unsung work of women everywhere today while offering a breathtaking, intimate view of one of the most important literary marriages of the 20th century. It is a book that speaks to our present moment as much as it illuminates the past. I just think Funder's because of her kind of existing work, I'm in a way more attracted to the fact that she's written another work of non-fictional biography, as it appears, than kind of another work of fiction. Because I thought All That I Am was good, but it wasn't amazing. Whereas Stasiland I actually thought was a top-notch book. So I'm really looking forward to Wifedom, and hopefully my local library gets it soon so I can read it. The fourth question is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. Now, I actually think Wifedom is only up for pre-order now, so potentially that is the most anticipated release for me in the second half of the year. The other thing that I was thinking about is Michael Katz's new translation of Brothers Karamazov, both because I've not read Brothers Karamazov and want to, but also because I've actually not read Michael Katz's translation of Dostoevsky yet, so I would probably like to read that at some point, although my year is looking quite packed at the moment, so I may not get around to reading it this year. Question number 5, your biggest disappointment. And I do have one which is quite unfortunate, and it's a recent read, and that's Perfume by Patrick Susskind. I really did not enjoy this book. It was certainly pacey. I got through it pretty quickly, but the book itself is just, for reasons I explained in my last wrap-up video for May, I found the book quite misogynistic, and the writing just did not connect with me at any level. And it's a shame because I am someone who actually really likes perfume and scents, and so the premise of the book really attracted me, but as it turns out, it did not live up to my expectation. Question number 6, your biggest surprise. And for me, the biggest surprise of the year has been Little Boy Lost by Margarita Lasky. I guess there's 2 elements to it. Number 1 is this is my first time reading a book published by Persephone, which is a UK-based publisher that publishes forgotten classics, mostly written by women. And so this is kind of right up their alley, and it is an absolutely phenomenal book. And I suppose the second element of surprise is just how much I enjoyed it, especially the last 30 pages of this book. Margarita Lasky just kind of winds you up slowly and turns the screws on you. And the very last line of this book pretty much punctures that pressure that's been slowly building to the point where you just go, oh. It was quite an end to the book, and I really, really enjoyed it. So highly recommend, and one of my biggest surprises of the year. Number 7 is your favorite new, that is debut or new to you author. And that's an easy one. It's George Eliot. I've never read any of her books prior to 2023. And having read Middlemarch, I just absolutely know that it will not be the last George Eliot book I read. I will probably go on to read another. I think I'll read Silas Marner or something before the end of the year. Number 8, newest fictional crush. Um, this is where I'm like, okay, this tag has been around since the YA days of BookTube, because I don't necessarily describe the characters that I like in books as fictional crushes. But if I were to say that there was one kind of dreamy, honorable character in all the books I read this year, and that would be Dobbin in Vanity Fair. I just thought he was a phenomenally good character. In some ways a little dull because he is so good, but it's kind of hard to get past a really, really good man in a phenomenally written story by one of the greatest writers of the Victorian era. So absolutely loved Vanity Fair and highly rated the character of Dobbin. Number 9 is your newest favorite character. I feel like there are two ways of answering this. There's thinking about your favorite character as a character that is inherently likable. So Dobbin is probably the best example of that, a character that you just like as a part of the book that you've read. Or there's a second way of thinking about this question, which is sometimes when an author crafts a character that is so interesting and complex and sometimes frustrating that you like the very fact of this character's existence itself. It has nothing to do with the likability of the character, but everything to do with the craft of the author. And there are two characters in two books that I've read since the start of the year that really stand out. One is Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair. I mean, what a character. She is so complex, so interesting, and completely ruthless, and also quite unlikable at times. But you also really, really like her because for the very reason that she is so interesting. And the second character, who's also female, is Lily Bart in The House of Mirth. She is just such a frustrating but also, again, complex and interesting character that I just absolutely adored that book because of her and the strength of the protagonist in that book. Number 10 kind of overlaps with number 9, and the question is a book that made you cry, and The House of Mirth did make me cry. I just thought it was one of the saddest books I've read in quite some time, and a kind of really frustrating sad, but so good because you just know that the author intended for you to have that reaction at the end. Number 11, a book that made you happy. And again, we've covered this book quite a few times, and that's Vanity Fair. Vanity Fair as a book just made me so happy. The scale of it, the sweeping cast of characters, the historical elements of it, the fact that they go and fight in the Napoleonic Wars in Belgium, and then they come back to the UK, and just the dynamics between people from different backgrounds, different social classes, just absolutely phenomenal. I'd also like to give an honourable mention to A Swim in the Pond in the Rain by George Saunders, which was an absolutely wonderful book that just affirmed my faith in short stories as a medium. I absolutely adored it, and it gave me a lot of joy. Number 12 is the most beautiful book you've received or bought so far this year. Now, I don't think I've shown this book yet. I am, of course, on a book buying ban until I get through some of the unread books on my bookshelf. But I did give myself a couple of exceptions to that rule. And one of the exceptions is around coffee table books. Hello. Do you want to look at some books with me? You want to look at some books with me? One of those books is a coffee table book that I got this year. I bought it at a secondhand store, and it was only, I think, $4 or $5 at the time. And it doesn't add to my unread bookshelf because there is literally nothing to read. And that is 700 Penguins. And it's just a book with penguin cover after penguin cover in the most wonderful kind of period retro illustrations. And I've just really enjoyed flipping through it and looking at some of the cover designs. I mean, some of them are so retro. I mean, look at this beautiful mosaic one for Robert Graves. And I mean, look at those. I think it's absolutely amazing. It's been living on my coffee table, and people have come over and flicked through them and really enjoyed it as well. So it's been a good conversation starter. Number 13 is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? I don't know about needing to read, but 2023 has been the year of reading Victorians for me. For those who don't know, every single year I have a reading theme for the year, and being confined to the books that are already on my bookshelf that are unread, I decided that the reading theme for this year is a year of reading Victorians, and I have many unread Victorian books on my bookshelf. So, and it's been a real success, I think. I've read a little bit of George Eliot. I've read Vanity Fair. I have read a bit of Dickens in The Tale of Two Cities. I read Thomas Hardy this month, and so I've sort of done a broad sweep of different authors from the Victorian period. There's a few more that I think I need to kind of cover by the end of the year to really say that I gave the Victorian period a red hot go. I'd like to read some Anthony Trollope, and I do have one of his books. I think I have Can You Forgive Her? So I might read that by the end of the year. I want to read more George Eliot. So as I said, I think I'll read Silas Marner. In terms of the other Victorian authors, I'm not so sure. I haven't read Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and that's the only one of the Bronte sisters that I haven't read yet. So I might give that a go before the end of the year. And if we have a bit of time, I want to read a little bit of Oscar Wilde as well. So that's sort of the plan in terms of Victorians for the rest of the year. I also want to read a little bit of Russians by the end of the year. I had so much fun last year in my year of reading Russians that I kind of want to get around to reading some of the Soviet books I have. So I have Dr. Zhivago and I have Life and Fate. And so I want to try and get around to one of those. And maybe a little bit of Chekhov. So I went to see a production of Uncle Vanya recently, and it's kind of got me back in the Chekhov mood. So I do have another collection of his short stories that are unread at the moment. So I might try and get through some of those. But otherwise, they are all big books. So I'm not really sure how I'll go getting through all of that before the end of the year. We will give it a red hot go. And we'll see how we go in the second half of 2023. Thank you, BookTube.